Uncivilized Vitality. This is a new playlist for 2024. Mentioned this earlier in the week. This is going to be the Uncivilized Self-Protection playlist. I'm going to go through, over the course of the year, we'll do a couple lessons a month. So by the end of the year, a couple dozen self-protection or self-defense lessons. I have a background in martial arts. I taught professionally for several years, ran several martial art schools, like commercial schools, businesses, where you came in, did the test, learned the martial arts, worked your way up to black belt. I've taught at the university martial arts at the university and part of the rec center, or two and three credit courses in martial arts and combative since 1990-91 school year. So I've been doing it a long time. I still train. I still do. I don't do as much judo anymore because now in my 50s I just don't bounce off the floor as much as I used to, or as easily as I used to. But I do a lot of that. I have a 5th degree black belt in Hapkido, Kwan. I've written a textbook that I've used at the university. It's called Seonsul, a functional martial art, which is just a reorganization of the skills in the traditional Korean Hapkido. I hold black belts in Gumdo, which is Korean Kendo, Judo, Taekwondo, and then I've studied or trained in boxing and catch wrestling, and currently working on some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu formal training. So always love to do the martial arts, and being able to fight or protect yourself and use personal and or surrogate violence on behalf of another is very important to be able to do, and it's part of natural movement. You have to be able to protect yourself. So this playlist is going to be about self-protection skills you can use at home. We're going to avoid getting into legalities too much. We'll talk about if you are in immediate, otherwise unavoidable threat of grave bodily harm or death. That's called lethal force, and you are entitled, just by natural right, to protect yourself with the use of lethal force. That force which a reasonable and otherwise prudent person would deem capable of causing grave bodily injury or death. So then, we don't want to get split hairs too much on that. My wife, who weighs like $120, she could punch me in the nose as hard as she could. Most prudent and reasonable people wouldn't consider that deadly force because it's not going to cause me grave bodily injury or harm. I mean, it could, but it's not going to. Whereas if the roles are reversed in a domestic violence situation, I weigh north of 200 pounds. If I punch a small woman such as my wife, that would be considered the potential for grave bodily harm or injury. So it's somewhat subjective, but technically, if you're going to defend yourself, you're only defending yourself with lethal force from the threat of lethal force. And one of the ways to do that is to run. That's the easiest way for self-protection, but this is not going to be a playlist of me running around because I'm not very fast. So you can run, jump, hide. That's why it's important to be able to move. Someone accosts you or threatens you with grave bodily harm, you can just jackrabbit, take off, run, parkour your way to safety. Barring that, you get caught and you have to fight. It's important to understand how to fight. In the traditional Hapkido, Kwan that I had reached master level in is 3,864 techniques composing the system. And you work your way up through all those. And then there are variations and variations of variations. You can go to a different style of martial art, like Jiu-Jitsu has thousands of permutations of a few dozen basic locks and holds. And you can split that down finer and finer in divisions. But basically, we're going to start like an iceberg. All martial arts come down to either grappling or striking. So if I were just to write those, all martial arts is either grappling or striking. All right, and you think of that as the tip of an iceberg. And then the further down, now we get down here into very particular martial arts, like, well, I do jiu-jitsu, or I do boxing, or I do judo, or I do tai kaiyan, or I do savat, or I do muay thai. That's just all splitting hairs. It all basically starts with grappling and striking. And even beyond this, it really just boils down to intent. We get into that later. Grappling, you'd be putting hands on. This would be what I call the closed range. The open range would be when we're far enough apart we can't touch each other. That's the running range. Now if we get close enough I can touch you, now we're in the mid-range or the striking and striking range where I can put hands on, punching and kicking. And then the closed range would be grappling, either standing up or on the ground, wrestling or jiu-jitsu. Then you would start to divide these further. So grappling is basically learning how to put holds on someone versus hold breaking, right? Each technique has its opposite within it. I can hold you with a downward elbow lock, a folding elbow lock, a wrist come along, a falling arm bar, some kind of rear naked choke, a one wing strangle, on and on and on. I learned to apply these holds to grapple from an offensive role, and I have to learn the counter moves or the hold breaks, releases as a defensive mode. Same thing over here with striking. Striking boils down to learning how to strike properly versus not being struck, right? Not being struck. And then you can take not being struck and you can move that into, for instance, I'll teach you about slips, slaps, and shields. It's the three broad categories of not being struck. Avoiding contact completely, redirecting or lessening impact with slaps. And then shields is mitigating or minimizing impact by taking the contact completely. And then we can divide those further. We can talk about slips. We can talk about slipping, bobbing, weaving, pulling, ducking, crowding. So, and then those can go further and further. But it all basically boils down to striking and grappling. And the first place we're going to start with this series on the playlist is we're going to start with the easiest one to learn and ironically the hardest one to master is striking with the upper limbs. We're going to just say boxing because everyone's familiar with that. And you probably know a great bulk of boxing already. You've heard the terms jab, reverse or rear, strike, straight right, uppercut, and hook. So people have heard those. Even heard expressions like, I gave so-and-so the old 1-2. That's a reference to the jab and the cross as the 1 and 2 in that system, referring to the punches. I sometimes use a color code myself. But 1, 2s, 3s, and 4s also work. And this series, I'll go through different aspects of boxing. I'll go through the punches, I'll go through footwork, and I'll go through the defensive movements, the slip, slap, shields. And then we'll get into some combos, drills, and strategies. But it's all going to be very, very simple. The only thing you're going to need to follow along at home is have enough space where you can take a couple steps forward and backward and a step to the side. And if you have a heavy bag for drills later, that's great. If you have a pair of focus mitts, something you can put on, and maybe a partner to hold these, and we can teach them some drills, you can learn that. You get a pair of hand wraps and some bag gloves, but just a pair of simple boxing gloves with the Velcro you can slap on just to protect your hand when you're working the bag, or even just to get a little weight while you're throwing your punches. And working on that. Mostly shadow boxing. But we're going to, as per what I normally do, I'll just talk a lot and then we'll practice a little bit in each of the videos. I won't talk too much. I'll try to keep it to keep this playlist minimal with the yak so we can do more punching. Then the next bit of the self-protection series I want to get into a little bit is the use of edged weapons. Maybe not things that are going to get you landed in prison, like small knives or the ADC knife that we have from Uncivilized Vitality. But I have an idea for a series on basic sword use, or kendo or gumdo. The use of the sword is quite practical nowadays. We'll go through that and I'll demonstrate the basic grips, the positions, the idea behind the cuts, and then we'll talk about what you can do to substitute using a sword. Like maybe my favorite, an umbrella, which is kind of a short, almost a thrusting sword or a thrusting spear. You can use a car scraper, an antenna, a stick. Anything you pick up can follow the same principles, the lines of cutting and blocking and such that you would do with traditional sword work. You shouldn't be walking around with a sword. We'll go through that, and then we'll get into doing maybe some basic kicking or use of the lower limbs in self-defense. We can do a series on that. And then I I probably hit up my friend Robert or Justin, or maybe somebody I can talk and let me throw them. We'll talk about some stand-up grappling series, and I'll show you some basic judo throws and or joint locks, and then probably some wrestling or grappling basics on the ground. So we got a whole series of self-protection things you can use this year, 2024. I'll try to put out 2 to 3 each month at the usual times, Mondays and Thursdays in the morning, 9 a.m. You can check out the new videos and learn to defend yourself. So we're going to start with boxing. I'm going to go change, and then we'll get a couple of these going right away. Like, subscribe, and comment in the comments below if there's a particular area of self-protection that you would like to see us address on the channel. Okay, that's it.